I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, show of strength. The Republican National Convention kicks off in Milwaukee just days after an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. We have team coverage, including reaction from a Catholic priest who prayed on stage just moments before the shooting. Classified documents case. A judge issues a major ruling regarding special counsel Jack Smith and former President Trump. And sobering thought by Pope Francis's warning against living an excessive lifestyle. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Bonaventure. Our top story tonight, it is official. The Republican Party has formally nominated Donald Trump as its presidential nominee. But that is just the tip of the iceberg today for the former president. As the RNC opens, the excitement is palpable.
This convention will come to order.
Thousands are expected to attend the four-day event in Milwaukee amid heavy security. And as the gathering opens, former President Donald Trump names his running mate.
It is a great honor to move that J.D. Vance be nominated by acclamation by this Republican National Convention as its candidate for the office of Vice President of the United States of America.
And as you just heard, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance is the VP pick. The 39-year-old is a Catholic convert and has the chance to become the second Catholic vice president in U.S. history. Vance went from nearly dropping out of high school to a stint in the U.S. Marines. He then attended The Ohio State University, where he double majored. After graduation, he then went on to Yale, where he earned a law degree. As someone who grew up in poverty, he says he appreciates some of the services that government offers to the poor. And there is yet more dizzying news on this day. A federal judge dismisses the classified documents case against former President Trump. The ruling says the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith by the Department of Justice was done illegally. Smith says he will appeal. Well, all the news takes place amid an unprecedented backdrop. Normally, the official nomination of the party's candidate for president is a celebration. This year's gathering is set to be a little different, however, after the assassination attempt on the former president over the weekend.
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
A gunman perched on a nearby rooftop with what authorities say was an AR-style gun, opening fire on the crowd below and attempting to assassinate the former president. Moments later, video shows Secret Service agents swarming and lifting up Trump, his face bloodied. Trump then pumping his fist and shouting to the crowd, "Fight," to show he's okay as he was rushed away. The FBI calling the incident
an assassination attempt against our former president, Donald Trump.
The Secret Service killed the suspected shooter, who the FBI has identified as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks. Crooks graduated from Bethel Park High School in Pennsylvania in 2022. At least one person was shot and killed at the rally. Corey Comparator was a retired firefighter and a father of two. He was also a devout Christian. Reports say he died while shielding his family from bullets. And as the former president prepares to accept the Republican Party's nomination for a third time, he says he has rewritten his acceptance speech since the attempt on his life and is planning a message of resilience and strength and not allowing evil to win. Other speakers in Milwaukee include Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley. They will touch on a number of topics, including inflation and the crisis at the U.S. border. And despite the assassination attempt, the Republican National Committee says for the most part, they are sticking to their plans for the four-day convention. And Catholic leaders from across the United States also reacted to the attempted assassination of former President Trump. EWTN's Elizabeth Jones explains.
There are people who want to kill him. In an almost eerie foreshadowing, Father Jason Cherone, who led prayer at the start of the Trump rally, urged participants to pray for Trump as he was leaving the event early for pastoral work.
I said to people, they thanked me for the prayer. And I said, yes, but the prayer has to continue. You have to pray. And I said that, there are people who want to shoot him.
He also says he prays for the soul of the shooter.
That in his last breath, he may have said, Jesus, remember me.
Reaction from many Catholic leaders calls on Americans to re-examine our consciences.
On this stage on lots of different fronts is inflammatory rhetoric. We make judgments, we speak the worst about each other.
Bishop David Zubik of the Diocese of Pittsburgh, which covers Butler, Pennsylvania, where the shooting occurred, says Americans need to think about the words we choose.
If we're going to be serious about who we are as disciples of the Lord Jesus, we got to really turn that down. And we've really got to take the example of Jesus and look for the best in each other and look for the ways in which we can become more unified.
Last week, he was here in Miami holding a similar rally with thousands of people in attendance.
Archbishop Thomas Wensky of Miami thanks God that Trump's life was spared and similarly called on Americans to tone down how we speak about politics.
To watch our language so that we don't engage in hyperbole that could end up encouraging acts of violence like we witnessed.
Archbishop Timothy Broglio, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, condemned the political violence on behalf of all his brother bishops and called on Mary, the Mother of God and patroness of the Americas, to pray for us. His response comes just after the USCCB issued a statement in June titled A Christian Response to Rising Threats of Political and Ideological Violence. The document calls on people to abstain from political violence and pursue dialogue. The Holy See responded to the deadly shooting, writing that it is united in prayer of the U.S. bishops for America, for the victims, and for peace in the country, so that the motives of the violent may never prevail.
Our nation has once again witnessed another deadly and tragic shooting.
At the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in Boston, Massachusetts, a priest, during Sunday's Mass, read a statement from Archbishop Cardinal Sean Patrick O'Malley, who called for our nation to pray for former President Donald Trump and those killed and injured in the shooting.
We must find peaceful ways to resolve our differences and avoid all political violence of any kind.
Calls for peace and prayer were mirrored in many Catholic leaders' homilies and statements. Archbishop Wilton Cardinal Gregory of Washington, D.C., issued a statement asking everyone of goodwill to keep former President Trump and all those killed or injured in the violence in our prayers. In Indianapolis, where the Eucharistic Congress is set to kick off in just 2 days, the Archbishop Charles Thompson wrote in part, "Please join me in prayer and greater commitment to peace, civility, healing, and dignity of human life in our country and world. May the grace of God unite us more fully in the witness to the sacredness of all that is good, true, and beautiful."
President Joe Biden issues sharp criticism of the Republican vice presidential pick. In a statement on social media, the president said J.D. Vance talks a big game about helping working people, but really wants to raise taxes on the middle class. This as Mr. Biden prepares to spend the next few days in Las Vegas, Nevada. On his busy schedule, a series of speeches, interviews, and campaigning. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
President Joe Biden, who has been under intense pressure to leave the race for the White House and let someone else run instead, isn't going anywhere for now. However, it's being reported in wake of the shooting over the weekend, his campaign is pulling down some TV ads. Meanwhile, in the White House Situation Room today, the president was briefed by DHS and the FBI on that assassination attempt. Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, steps to the podium in the White House press briefing room with this update on the attempted assassination of former president and current GOP contender for the White House, Donald Trump.
Both prior to and after the events of this past weekend, the Secret Service enhanced former President Trump's protection based on the evolving nature of threats to the former president and his imminent shift from presumptive nominee to nominee.
2 days after the gunman fired off his shots, a multitude of critical questions needing answers. The investigation is still very fresh and new.
The FBI is leading the criminal investigation, which is ongoing. An independent review will be conducted to understand the facts regarding protection of the event and make findings and recommendations accordingly.
My fellow Americans.
Just last night, his boss, President Joe Biden, speaking from the Oval Office, saying Americans must stand together and to remember.
While we may disagree, we are not enemies. We're neighbors. We're friends, co-workers, citizens, and most importantly, we're fellow Americans.
With November not that far away, along with the political conventions arriving in Milwaukee and Chicago, the president called for peaceful debate and that it's time to cool down the political rhetoric.
All of us now face a time of testing as the election approaches. And the higher the stakes, the more fervent the passions become. This places an added burden on each of us to ensure that no matter how strong our convictions, we must never descend into violence.
Also tonight, President Biden was scheduled to be interviewed by NBC's Lester Holt earlier today. You'll recall he had that other interview recently with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, trying to prove he's up to the task for running again in November after that debate debacle. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the concern on Capitol Hill right now is finding out why there was a breakdown in security. Even though Congress is in recess for the Republican National Convention, lawmakers are asking, how could this happen? All this while congressional leaders are calling for calm. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest development. Eric.
Good evening, Tracy. Congress is already demanding an investigation take place to determine how this attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump could even happen. A number of lawmakers have received a Secret Service briefing, and several committees are already demanding answers, calling the shooting a security failure.
How is it that someone could get on a roof with a superior position with a weapon and attempt to assassinate former President Donald Trump? It's just unthinkable, unfathomable. We need to know, is this a protocol failure? Is this a resources issue? Or is this just a failure of those who were on site that day?
Already, the House Oversight and Homeland Security Committees have scheduled hearings with the head of the Secret Service when Congress returns next week. The head of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, put out a statement. Quote, "We understand the importance of the independent review announced by President Biden yesterday and will participate fully. We will also work with the appropriate congressional committees on any oversight action."
I think first you let the investigation proceed, conclude, and then the Department of Justice, Secret Service, FBI need to be completely transparent. I mean, completely transparent. They haven't been so in the past.
The FBI said on Sunday that agents are investigating the shooting as a possible terrorism attack and assassination attempt. There is no indication the 20-year-old shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, acted as part of a larger plot, but authorities said bomb-making materials were found inside the suspect's vehicle. Right now, authorities are trying to break into his cell phone to determine a motive. All lawmakers agree violence like this should never take place.
When the message goes out constantly that the election of Donald Trump would be a threat to democracy and that the republic would end, I mean, it heats up the environment. We cannot do that. It's simply not true. Everyone needs to turn the rhetoric down.
Several lawmakers tell me that they are now reconsidering their own security as they continue their campaigns, and some have decided to cancel events. Others are moving them to online. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including protecting the president. A former Secret Service agent gives his insights into the assassination attempt against Donald Trump. And a high-stakes election in Rwanda could possibly extend the 30-year rule of its leader. Back, as you just saw in Eric's report, lawmakers are demanding answers about Saturday's security failures. Today, new video showing some of the attendees at the Trump rally noticing the gunman at least 1 minute before the shooting. Here you see the would-be assassin scaling the building of where he would open fire. We also learned that the Secret Service did not sweep that building, saying they were relying on local law enforcement to do it. All right, for more, let's go to Paul Eckloff, a 23-year veteran of the Secret Service who provided detail for Presidents George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and former President Donald Trump during Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Paul, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. A lot more questions and answers right now about all this. But first, what went through your mind when you heard about the attempted assassination on former President Trump, especially at a venue like an outdoor rally?
Well, it was painfully familiar, and It's an interesting question that in a number of interviews I've done, nobody has asked yet. And what former agents feel is something that I don't think any other American or anybody else on earth would feel. We wish we were there. We wish it happened on our watch, because we know that we could add to it. We could help, and we could save the former president or the president's life. We want to dive through the screen and use our bodies to shield the problem. It's really unique. Obviously, we're all troubled. There's, as you said, there's more questions than answers. I've been on thousands of presidential sites. I was with 3 presidents over a period of 14 years in my 23-year career, and on campaigns, foreign presidents, former presidents. Each site is unique and complex. So I probably have more questions than the public would even ask. And I think we all do. And it's very early. This is the first assassination attempt in history in the modern media age. We see it as it happens. We see spectator videos. We hear sound.
Paul, there have been a lot of eyewitness accounts, and I'm sure you've heard them too. One in particular that sticks out in my mind was a man who gave an interview to the BBC saying that he saw that person on the building, and they were pointing to what they believed, I guess the person thought were agents, informing him this person was on the building and looked like he had a rifle, and it seemed like it took them a long time to take control of the situation. Talk us through that. I mean, what goes through their minds, and what may have led to what seems to people being a delay in taking this person out?
Well, I would caution people to realize that witness testimony is often flawed, and time tends to elapse or expand or contract based on memory. It may have felt like 4 or 5 minutes. I don't have the timing. And that individual may have notified local law enforcement. If that officer was on a post, he can't leave it. He can communicate via his radio to the command post and pass it along. The way the system works is the vulnerability that was identified was likely that rooftop being a main one, because it has a line of sight into the venue outside the security perimeter, is the counter snipers have counter sniper response teams that when there is a suspected lone gunman or a suspected item or how do I put it, a suspected threat, they send out a team to investigate it. Because though I hear a lot of critics from the military and I honor their service, the rules of engagement in a war zone are far different than in a farm field in Pennsylvania. You cannot just shoot out into the rural environment and put down a threat on a suspicion. It appears from reports that an officer saw the individual after climbing a ladder, was engaged with the rifle, and then the shooter started his actions far faster than he had planned to. Once that person presented himself as a threat on that rooftop and the counter sniper made that assessment within a second, he shot that young man and neutralized that threat. But I think it's important for people to understand what the superhuman things you're asking from humans. That counter sniper with his powerful rifle and the best training in the world has to decide in a split second that that person is not a teenager with a pair of binoculars. If he had shot an innocent individual trying to get a view of the former president without a weapon, we'd be having a very different conversation.
Well, Paul, we thank you for your insights and coming on today and for your service. God bless.
Thank you.
All right, now to Rwanda, where presidential elections are taking place with a predictable outcome. President Paul Kagame is running virtually unopposed. While condemned by many as a violent authoritarian, others have praised Kagame for presiding over impressive growth after the 1994 genocide ended. There were long lines at some of the polling stations in the capital. In 2015, Rwandans voted to lift the 2-term limit. Kagame could potentially stay in power until 2034. All right, now to the Middle East, where Hamas says ceasefire negotiations are ongoing. This after an Israeli airstrike targeted a high-ranking member of the militant group. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is not certain that Mohammed Deif has been killed. Deif is considered the chief architect behind the October 7th terror attack that sparked the war. Hamas claims the commander is in good health and added that the Israeli strike that targeted him killed at least 90 people, including children, in an area designated as a humanitarian safe zone. Well, back to the U.S., a historical heat wave and hundreds of thousands of people without power. This is a situation right now in Houston, Texas, a week after Hurricane Beryl hit the Lone Star State. Governor Greg Abbott is demanding an investigation on the delayed response of CenterPoint Energy and future preparations for the rest of hurricane season. Meanwhile, power has been restored to more than 2 million customers. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, the rain in Spain. A familiar team wins the European Soccer Championship last night in Berlin, and there was something fishy going on yesterday at the Vatican. We'll explain. Something for all you soccer fans out there. Spain, led by its coach who makes the sign of the cross before games, won the European Soccer Championship last night in Berlin. Spain won its record 4th Euro title after defeating England by the final score of 2-1 in the final. Spain's Nico Williams, whose family was once saved from a human trafficking ring by the Catholic group Caritas, scored the opening goal. England tied the game briefly in the second half before falling just short of winning its first Euro title. And in Miami, Argentina won the Copa America Championship by beating Colombia 1-0 in last night's final. Argentina won its 16th Copa title, even though superstar Lionel Messi missed most of the second half and extra time with a leg injury. Well, in many parts of the world, the second Sunday in July is referred to as Sea Sunday, a time for Christian communities to come together to celebrate and pray for those who work on the water in vital but potentially dangerous jobs. EWTN Vatican journalist Paula Arraza has more.
The sea is a dangerous workplace. Tsunamis, piracy, and isolation are only some of the greatest hardships for those who work at sea. Because of these challenges, support for seafarers is essential. Stella Maris is a Catholic international agency that provides pastoral care to seafarers and their families. In 1920, a group of lay people founded the organization in Glasgow, Scotland. While these jobs impact so many people's everyday lives, it is a little talked about sector.
If we look around ourselves in our house, most of the things that we have, they come and they are transported by the ship. We say that around 90% of the commerce is done by ship. And there is a workforce of almost 2 million people that they are always on the move from one side to another. So from our TV, the cell phone, but even the gasoline or even the food or anything else.
Stella Maris' founding belief is that every seafarer deserves fair working conditions and respect for their human rights. Today, the Catholic Network has over 1,000 chaplains and volunteers in 330 ports across 60 countries, from Australia to the USA, working to support seafarers.
We have chaplains and volunteers that every day they go to the port, they do the so-called ship visit if they are allowed to enter into port, and to provide spiritual and material assistance to the seafarers.
Beyond having to confront injustices, exploitation, and inequalities on board, Father Bruno also mentions the dangers of isolation, piracy, and natural catastrophes. He focuses especially on the difficulties that not only come with cultural diversity, but also with being away from one's family for extended periods of time. In order to encourage the world to pray for those who work in the maritime sector, Christian communities come together each year on the second Sunday of July, Sea Sunday, to pray for the safety of seafarers and fishers and to thank them for their sacrifices. The Vatican has also reminded the faithful of the importance of the sea, as it is by way of the sea that the Church has formed and spread throughout the entire world.
Jesus started the Church with the fishers, and Jesus often preached from the boat in the lake of Tiberias or other things. So the sea is at the beginning of the Church, but also the apostles, they spread the Catholic faith by sailing, by moving from one place to another. So sea is very important for us because the sea is where the church was started, and the sea is the place where the church expanded around the world.
In Rome, Paola Riasa, EWTN News Nightly.
And finally tonight, Pope Francis urges the faithful to reject a life of excess.
E poi essere sobri nei pensieri, essere sobri nei sentimenti.
During a Sunday address at the Vatican, the Holy Father says the faithful should strive to live in a sober and non-materialistic way. He called to mind the instructions of Jesus to his disciples, telling them to take nothing for their journey as they evangelize. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.